Today's speaker, it is a great pleasure for me to introduce, and that's Dr. Eric Brown, an associate professor of philosophy at Washington University in St. Louis. And his specialties are Greek and Roman philosophy, especially ethics. He's written on a wide array of authors, but focuses, if this could be a focus, Plato, Aristotle, and Hellenistic philosophy. And he has a book forthcoming from Cambridge, I think next year or the year after, on Stoic Cosmopolitanism, a much anticipated book. So please join me in welcoming Eric Brown. Today's paper is called Cosmopolitanism and Unmet Friends.
That's true. That's the title of the paper. Thank you, Patrick, for your the invitation and the hospitality, especially the hospitality coming tonight. Yes, thank you. The handout will make it a little easier to follow. Not to mention that it will give you some ammunition against me. All right, so I want to start with two platitudes of Greek thought. Number one, fellow citizens, in a good polis at least, are friends. Number two, friends are acquaintances. Now, if you add to those two commonplaces an obvious fact, the obvious fact that as a city gets larger, it becomes harder and harder for people who are citizens of that city to be acquaintances, you might see that there's a size of the city at which the citizens can't be acquaintances, so couldn't be friends, so couldn't be the fellow citizens of a good polis, so past a certain point, the polis can't be good. And Aristotle not only articulates these two commonplaces, but he draws the inference. He draws the inference that a polis has to be limited in population, but also, not just population, but in geography. So even if we were to imagine a city of 200 citizens, but then spread those citizens out all over the globe, it won't work. At least not if things are technologically as they were in the Greek world. Maybe it could work now, but not as they were then. But the Stoics like to say that in fact the model polis is the whole cosmos. So it looks as though if they're making that claim, they're flouting at least one of those two commonplaces. So now you might think, well, maybe they don't really mean it, that the cosmos is a model polis. And in fact, the reports of this cosmopolis doctrine are that the cosmos is, as it were, a polis, hoione in Greek, or quasi in Latin. All of the reports are unanimous in inserting that little qualification. So you might think, oh, it's just a metaphor, has no practical import, and so they don't mean it in a way that would cause them to give up these commonplaces. They're respecting the commonplaces when they say the cosmos is only as it were a polis. That, I think, is not correct. I think that they do think that there's practical import in their cosmopolitanism, and one way of showing that there's practical import in their cosmopolitanism is to show that they were willing to flout one of these two commonplaces. So that's what I'm going to do today. But what I want to do is show that they want their doctrine to be of practical import. They think that for it to be of practical import, it has to have a grip on us. And to have a grip on us, it can't be totally flouting common sense. The Stoics have been aptly characterized as the G.E. Moores of the ancient world. And they like to work with common sense. So what I want to show is that while they are willing to reject one of the two commonplaces, they are not willing to reject all of the things that make that commonplace plausible. So they want to accommodate as much of the common sense force of the commonplace they're rejecting while they reject it. Hence, in this way, they can really say that their cosmopolitan doctrine has practical import. It does fit with our common sense, though it doesn't fit perfectly with our common sense. So I want to suggest, and in fact, at the very end of the talk, I'm going to throw at you a text from Aristotle, where Aristotle endorses the idea that we naturally have a kind of friendship that's love of human beings as such. That human qua humans have with each other a natural friendship, and he calls it philanthropia. And when I say one of the acid tests for whether the Stoic doctrine of the cosmopolitan friendship is plausible and has practical import is just to compare it with a similar kind of claim from another philosopher in antiquity, and I think what we'll see is Aristotle comes off looking quite bad in the comparison. That's going to be just a suggestion at the end of the talk. Two methodological remarks before I get rolling. One, I'm going to talk generically of the Stoics for the most part, and that's because that's what most of the ancient evidence does. But let me tell you, when I say the Stoics, I mean to be referencing a view that was certainly a possible view, and in my view, likely an actual view held in the 3rd century. So I want to say that the evidence I'm drawing on can be reliably traced to Chrysippus, the great Greek Stoic of the 3rd century, and that's the Stoicism I have in mind when I say the Stoics. That's an important qualification because there were many Stoics over many years, and they did, in fact, disagree about many things. So it'd make no more sense to say the Stoics believed that P without any further qualification than it would to say Kantians believed that P without further qualification. There's just too many of them who believe too many different things. Qualification needs to come in. The second clarification is, though I started with commonplaces that are in Aristotle, and though at the end of the talk I'm going to ask you to compare a passage in Aristotle with what I've said about the Stoics, I don't want to make any claims about historical connections between Aristotle and the Stoics. In fact, I think the 3rd century Stoics didn't read Aristotle, didn't have the text that we have, had some text by Aristotle, but didn't think they were worth engaging in. So Aristotle doesn't have the direct influence. The point of drawing him into the talk is merely for points of comparison. All right, so enough of the clarifications. Let's get into it. Let's first look at the Stoics' view of that first commonplace, that the fellow citizens in a good polis are friends. So I'll introduce some evidence that they hold this view, and then I'll introduce some evidence that they think that that view extends even to the cosmopolis, the whole world. So here's a little argument for it. Premise 1, citizens of a good city are friends. What's the evidence for that? Well, here's some evidence. Text 1. This is a passage from Diogenes Laertius describing Zeno, the founding Stoic's work, Republic. And he says, that's Zeno of Citium, says that all who are not excellent are personal and public enemies and slaves and alienated from each other, parents from children, brothers from brothers, familiars from familiars, when, again in the Republic, he makes the excellent alone. Citizens note friends, familiars, and free. So in the ideal city, all the adults are both citizens and friends. Right? So as long as Chrysippus endorses that doctrine from the school's founder, Zeno, then we've got evidence for that first premise: the citizens of a good city are friends. We have further evidence to support the inference, and that is that the Stoic doctrines of what friendship is, their definition of friendship, and their definition of homonoia, like-mindedness, very much support the thought that citizens in a good city will be friends. Because homonoia, like-mindedness, is a traditional ideal of successful cities. Homonoia supervenes in a city when there's a lack of stasis, which is political division. And so that's always been the ideal in Greek political thought. And indeed, it is the ideal for the shaping Zeno's Republic. Notice that text 1 again, and how he's contrasting two situations: the situation of enmity and division and the situation of agreement. So let's look at the definitions of homonoia and friendship. Homonoia is in text 2. This is from Stobaeus, his summary of Stoic ethics. And the text says that the Stoics say that concord, or homonoia, is knowledge of common goods or shared goods. That's why the excellent people all enjoy concord with each other by agreeing on the matters of life, while the inferior, because they disagree, are enemies to each other, evildoers to each other, and warlike. So there's your homonoia. Now look at text 3, an account of friendship. This one happens to be from Diogenes Laertius. Similar definitions also occur in Stobaeus. They also say that friendship exists only among the excellent on account of their likeness. their similarity, not their like-mindedness, but their similarity. For they say that friendship is a kind of community in the matters of life, since we treat friends as we treat ourselves. So notice that the community in the matters of life is a defining feature of both friendship and of homonoia. Right? And that explains why you would be inclined, insofar as you take homonoia to be an ideal characteristic of a good polis, you would take friendship to be a characteristic of the citizens in that polis. Right? So that's just to give an explanation as to why Zeno is saying what he's saying in text 1, that in a good polis the citizens are friends. Enough of that evidence. Let's look to see whether they extend this evidence even to the cosmos. So first, let me give you some evidence of this cosmopolis doctrine. The juiciest text for this is text 4, and this is from Cicero's De Natura Deorum, where his Stoic spokesperson Balbus is laying out the Stoic theology. Notice theology. The claim that the city is, the cosmos is a city, is a premise in a theological argument first and foremost. So that might even support the thought that it's merely metaphorical, a thought that I'm trying to resist. So just for fairness, I want to make that very explicit. So here's text 4. Balbus says, "It remains for me to show and somehow to conclude that every existing thing in this cosmos that human beings use has been made and prepared for the sake of human beings. First, the cosmos itself is made for the sake of gods and human beings, and the things that exist in the cosmos are prepared and contrived for the enjoyment of human beings. Why? Because the cosmos is, as it were, a shared home or city of gods and human beings, since they alone, by using reason, live by right and law. Thus, just as Athens and Sparta should be thought to have been fashioned for the sake of Athenians and Spartans, and everything that exists in these cities is rightly said to belong to their peoples, just so, whatever exists in the entire cosmos should be thought to belong to gods and human beings." Now, I think the basic structure of the argument is pretty clear. There's a premise that says gods and human beings are citizens of the cosmos, a premise that says, by reference to the examples of Athens and Sparta, a city is made for the sake of its members, and everything in a city belongs to its citizens. And so we can infer that the cosmos is made for the sake of gods and human beings, and everything in the cosmos belongs to gods and human beings. Now, for my purposes here, I'm not so much interested in the conclusion as I am in that first premise. Why does he think gods and human beings are citizens of the cosmos? Look again at the text, and you'll see there's an argument for that premise as a conclusion. And the argument invokes a Stoic definition of what a polis is. The Stoics like to define a polis as either a dwelling place for members of the polis, or a system, systema, of the members that's been put in order by law. Now, when they say law, they don't mean the decrees of a duly constituted authority. They mean right reason. And most extant cities, indeed all extant cities, fail to be put in order by right reason. Have you ever seen one that was? They bite the bullet on that. And they'll say, look, by our definition, no extant city should be called a polis. But the cosmos as a whole is a dwelling place where human beings and gods live. Notice that language. And also, it's put in order by right reason, the cosmos is. But fly in this little ointment for Balbus' presentation of the argument is this. It's simply not true that all human beings live by law. Only the ones who possess right reason live by law. The Stoics are clear about this, that only the sages, the excellent, the virtuous, are nomikos, nomikoi, and nomimoi. That's to say, expert in the law and lawful. The rest of us who fail to be sages, we are not experts in the law and lawful. So we do not live by law. So we are not, by the standards here articulated, citizens in the cosmopolis. That affects Balbus' argument. The conclusion should not be The first premise, rather, should not be that gods and human beings are citizens of the cosmos. It should be gods and wise human beings are citizens of the cosmos. And the conclusion should not be that everything in the cosmos belongs to gods and human beings. It should be that everything in the cosmos belongs to gods and wise human beings. Right? But that's Balbus's problem. This is Cicero's fault. It's not a problem with the Stoic doctrine. The Stoics are consistent on that. They do in fact say that everything belongs to the wise, but not that everything belongs to everybody. Notice text 5. And the Stoics say that all things belong to the sages, for the law has given them perfect authority. But some things are said to belong to the fools, in the way in which some things are also said to belong to the unjust, belonging in a way to the polis and in another way to those who use them. So there's a way in which a fool can have things belong to him or her, just because these are the things that he or she uses. But that's not the important kind of belonging. The kind of belonging is the kind of belonging that gives one normative authority over what belongs to you. And that normative authority is only going to those who are sages, who have right reason and live in accordance with right reason and law. So the Stoics are happy with the conclusion that the providence of the world, the providential ordering of the world, differentiates between the wise and the unwise. The cosmopolis that Chrysippus articulates is an elitist cosmopolis. It's one in which you and I are not full citizens. So just as extant cities aren't real cities, the cosmopolis lives up to the real standards of a real city, but not every human being lives up to the standards of being a citizen of that cosmopolis. Now, just as a digression or an aside, as a point of information perhaps, it's worth noting that some Stoics disagreed with Chrysippus on this note. They thought that the cosmopolis was more democratic, that all human beings were members of it. And they made the test for citizenship in the ideal city not living in accordance with right reason, but merely possessing reason. Because merely possessing reason makes you a part of the cosmos. And if you're a part of the cosmos, you could be a citizen. So they just changed the notion of citizenship. And the paradigmatic text for this more democratic cosmopolis is text 6 on your handout. It's from Cicero's De Finibus. Notice how different it is. Moreover, they think that the cosmos is ruled by the will of the gods, and that it's like a city or state common to humans and gods, and each one of us is part of this cosmos. From this, it follows naturally that we should put the common advantage above our own. Notice that. That's a practical conclusion being drawn from the doctrine of the cosmopolis, totally absent from the other context, where the doctrine of the cosmopolis is not used for practical conclusions, but used to ground a claim about the gods. It's a claim about theology, about the providence of the world. So very different doctrine and very different use of it here. For just as the laws put the safety of all before the safety of individuals, so a good man who's wise and obeys laws, plural, notice laws, plural. This good guy is not strictly speaking a sage, a wise person. This is just an ordinary good person, like Patron, who's not a sage, but he's a decent guy. And he follows the laws most of the time anyhow. And he's not ignorant of his civic duty, consults the advantage of all more than that of any one person or himself. The traitor to his country is to be scorned no more than he who deserts the common advantage or safety on account of his own advantage or safety. So a very different doctrine for very different purposes. We don't know who was the first Stoic to articulate this. We don't have any text articulating this democratic cosmopolis that predates Cicero, and it's entirely possible it's Cicero's invention. Cicero certainly puts it forward in his own voice in De Legibus, but it also pops up in some later Stoics, including Marcus Aurelius, who has this much more democratic cosmopolis in mind than the elite one that Chrysippus favored. But anyhow, if you've been following all of these twists and turns, the point was that citizens of a good polis are friends, and second, that the citizenship of the cosmopolis is elite, and it's limited to the people who have the homonoia with each other and so are going to be friends with each other. So it's also going to be the case that fellow citizens of the cosmopolis are friends. But since the cosmopolis is quite large, we're going to have to be flouting one of the two commonplaces. We have not flouted the first one. We've in fact hewed to it. So the second one must go. It must be possible to have unmet friends. So we go looking. Is there textual evidence to support the claim that it's possible to have unmet friends? Yes, there is. One is a report concerning Zeno from Clement of Alexandria. This is text 7 on your handout. Zeno the Stoic, who gets this from Plato, who got it from a foreign philosophy, don't ask me which, I have no idea, says that all good persons are friends with each other. All good persons are friends. It doesn't say that they've met or anything. It's just that that's just enough. You might think that it's just because they have that homonoia, and the homonoia is what makes them friends. Text 8, even more explicit, also from De Natura Deorum. This is from Book 1, when the academic Cotta is responding to the Epicurean Velleius. How much better are the Stoics, whom you censure? They think that the wise are friends with the wise, even if they are strangers. Doesn't get more explicit than that. For nothing is more lovable than virtue, and we will esteem the man who has attained it wherever on earth he lives. So here I think the evidence is fairly clear. The Stoics are, in fact, willing to flout the commonplace that friends must be acquaintances. One might suppose, then, that the Stoics' conception of cosmopolitan friendship has no practical import. After all, if friendship does not require interaction, then why should cosmopolitan friendship matter? And this problem is perhaps intensified by the role that the gods play in the Stoic view of cosmopolitan friendship. Is one's cosmopolitan friendship with another human as remote as one's cosmopolitan friendship with a god? So what I want to say in the next few minutes is that despite the appearances, there is practical import to the Stoic doctrine of cosmopolitan friendship, because the Stoics think that one should behave in certain ways with human beings so as to try to cultivate cosmopolitan friendship. I will leave to one side Stoic theology and the questions about cosmopolitan friendship with gods. It might well be that friendship with gods has no special practical import for the Stoics. The gods will be our friends when we're ready to agree with them. We don't need, in addition to cultivating ourselves, to cultivate them as friends. But other human beings are different. They need help to make progress toward virtue as much as we do. And that state of virtue is what makes our friendship possible. So the goal of cosmopolitan friendship encourages us to help other human beings, even if they're not related to us or citizens of the same local polis. To defend the Stoics from the charge of irrelevance, one needs first to get clearer about that charge. So let me start by articulating why one might accept the commonplace that friends are acquaintances. And here I'm again drawing on Aristotle, because he's good at this kind of thinking through these commonplaces. So one might say that friends must benefit each other, and that in order to do that, they must know each other. Or perhaps friends must spend time together, sharing particular activities, and in order to do that, they must know each other. Finally, one might say that friends must wish each other well, and that in order to do that, they have to know each other. Each of these reasons, one might think, points to a weakness in the Stoic account of cosmopolitan friendship. Because it looks like if they've got friends who haven't even met, they've got friends who can't benefit each other, who can't wish each other well, who can't share particular projects. But in fact, I want to say, the Stoics accommodate the intuitive force of these three claims, these three considerations that support the commonplace that requires acquaintance for friends. And in this way, Stoicism is trying to connect their notion of cosmopolitan friendship with the common sense and practical import. So let me begin with the point about benefiting. Stobaeus' outline of Stoic ethics gives three successively more remarkable reports of how the Stoics say that, quote, all goods are common to the excellent. Here are the first two reports, text 9 and text 10 on your handout. Text 9, they say that all goods are common to the excellent. And in accordance with this, when someone benefits a neighbor, he also benefits himself. Text 10. They say the goods are common in a second way, for they think that everyone who benefits anyone whatsoever, neighbor or not, notice, receives an equal benefit by this very thing, while no fool either is benefited or benefits. For they say that benefiting is sustaining in accordance with virtue, and being benefited is being affected in accordance with virtue. That second report, that text 10, it gives the crucial principle. Since every benefit bestowed is due to a virtuous movement, and every virtuous movement benefits the agent who moves, the benefactor is always benefited by the benefiting. Goods are therefore common. Anyone who gives a good to another also shares that good himself. These two reports, though, make it seem as though benefiting another requires some proximity. The first speaks of benefiting a neighbor, and while the second gets past that restriction, there's no hint of how one could share goods outside of some narrowly circumscribed area. But the third report in Stobaeus give hints and more. That's text 11 on your handout. They say that all goods are common among the excellent, and evils among the inferior. That's why one who benefits someone also benefits oneself, and one who harms someone also harms oneself. All the excellent who benefit each other, even when they're not totally friends with each other, or are not well-minded toward each other, or in good repute with each other, or receptive of each other, either because they are not known to each other, notice, or because they don't live in the same place. And still they are disposed well toward each other for well-mindedness, friendliness, approval, and receptiveness. And fools are in the opposite circumstances. There are many, many points to consider about this text, some of which you might want to use as criticisms of my view. Let me start with these 2 points. There is deep agreement among even the sages who have not met, and sages always benefit each other even when they have not met. These 2 points are related, for the sages benefit each other by confirming their agreement with every virtuous action that they do. This can seem counterintuitive. It outrages Plutarch in text 12. He says, if a single sage anywhere at all extends his finger prudently, ta-da, all sages throughout the inhabited world are benefited. That's supposed to be the Stoic view. It's obviously Plutarch mocking that. He thinks it's ridiculous. But the point is actually not entirely implausible. People speak easily of a community of scholars or the Jewish American community, and it's commonly thought that anyone who represents such a community well benefits the community as a whole, and thereby every member of the community. And one might be tempted to explain this pattern of benefit by complicated causal probabilities. As a scholar, I am benefited by another scholar's kindnesses just because those kindnesses dispose other people to be kind toward scholars and thus me. But it's not difficult to imagine that those kindnesses that the other scholar does benefit me even without the causal intermediaries. After all, I value scholarly kindnesses in the world. Why should I not say that it's good for me if there are more scholarly kindnesses in the world? This thought is not absurd, especially when the envisioned community is defined by deep agreement about what's valuable and right, and where every member of the community always represents the community well, as it would be the case for the sages. So what the Stoics seem to be relying on is an expanded sense of benefit. And they can tie that expanded sense of benefit, actually, to their metaphysics of all-pervasive pneuma. But never mind that. The important point is the expanded sense of benefit has some intuitive, persuasive force independent of any metaphysics. And this expanded sense of benefit blunts a bit the demand that friends be acquaintances. But it's also worth noting, going back to that text 11, that the Stoics do not rely merely upon an expanded sense of benefit. They also concede, according to text 11, that there's a difference between benefits given to neighbors and benefits given to the unknown. A difference between friendship shared by neighbors and the friendship shared by those who are not acquaintances. This concession appears most clearly in text 11 because he says sages who are not acquaintances are not, quote, totally friends. Moreover, this admission is apparently explained by text 11. Acquaintance is required for goodwill, a good reputation, and recognition. Now this suggests that what the Stoics are actually operating with is degrees of friendship. And this might seem surprising. There are no, according to the Stoics, degrees of virtue. And you might have thought that friendship is just like virtue. the virtue constituted by two people instead of just by one. But in fact, the idea that the Stoics might be operating with degrees of friendship in mind is supported by further evidence. So look at Plutarch's testimony in text 13. Further then, in his second book on friendship, teaching that friendship should not be dissolved for all wrong actions, he, that's Chrysippus, uses these words. For it's fitting that some wrong actions be entirely passed over, while other wrong actions receive slight attention, and other wrong actions receive more attention, and still others be worthy of the total dissolution of the friendship. What's more than this, Chrysippus says in the same work that we will interact more with some people and less with others, with the result that some are our friends more and others less so. And with such a range coming to be to a great extent, for some come to be worthy of this much friendship and others worthy of that much, some people will be held to deserve this much trust and the like, and others will be held to deserve that much. Now, one important note. Chrysippus has to be speaking loosely here in order to allow that there can be friendships in the face of any errors, any wrong actions whatsoever. We've seen that the strict doctrine is that only the excellent, only the virtuous are friends. And the excellent, we know that the excellent do not do wrong actions. So here he has to be speaking loosely. That's okay. Chrysippus is on record. Plutarch records this at 1034 AD on Stoic self-contradictions. Chrysippus is on record as saying that for the purposes of popularizing a view, one will often speak loosely and not to the strict truth, in order to convey the view in language that's more accessible to the audience. Right? So you have to be thinking about, sort of instead of super precise, rigorous philosophical presentations of a position to fellow scholars, we write popularizing books, and then of course other philosophers are like, oh, that's such crap, it's, blah, 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 it's loose. And it's like, well, but it's loose because the audience is a different audience, right? Chrysippus is saying there's a point to doing some popularizing. And that must be what he's doing in this passage that Plutarch is talking about, all right? But the interesting point is not that he's willing to talk about friendship in a way that even non-excellent people can be friends. The interesting point for me today is that he is acknowledging degrees of friendship. And it looks like the acknowledgement of degrees of friendship is predicated on the amount of interaction between the friends. And it looks like that could apply even to sages, not just to the friendship that non-sages have. There's even more evidence to support this suggestion. This is text 14 on your handout from Stobaeus' record of Stoic ethics again. Friendship is spoken of in three ways. In one way, for the sake of shared benefit, according to which people are called friends. They deny that the Stoics, deny that this is a good, because according to them, nothing composed of separate things is a good. What's called friendship in the second sense, a friendly relationship with one's neighbors, they say is an external good. And friendship concerning oneself, in accordance with which one is a friend of one's neighbors, they declare to be a good of the soul. Now, it's not clear what's meant by this first sense of friendship, the one of shared benefit. The friendship of reciprocal exchange, sometimes called utility friendship, seems to have been discussed by the Stoics, but several sources record that such a thing is, quote, falsely named friendship, according to the Stoics. Moreover, it's odd to say that this relationship, the relationship of reciprocal exchange or utility friendship, would be a friendship for the sake of benefits, since the Stoics typically reserve the word benefit for genuine goods, again, except in popularizing context. But never mind that first sense of friendship and the questions it raises. Notice the second and the third. The second and the third kinds of friendship shed light, I think, on the question of degrees of friendship. Friendship as a good of the soul cannot admit of degrees. It would be just like virtue, which doesn't admit of degrees. Either your soul is in coherent harmony or it's not. But friendship as an external good, the friendship of face-to-face interactions between two wise people, that can admit of degrees. So that's what I want to suggest is underpinning this talk of degrees of friendship. And I want to suggest, in fact, that it parallels a certain contrast that Stoics often make between virtue and virtuous action. Virtue does not admit of degrees, but virtuous actions, in a way, do. Cicero puts this a bit clumsily in Book 3 of De Finibus in text 15. He says, although the Stoics deny that virtues and vices increase, they nevertheless think that each of them can be expanded in a certain way and, as it were, widened. And it's just kind of, unfortunately, philosophers sometimes slip into metaphors and don't explain the metaphors. Fortunately, though, we have another text from Cicero, the Paradoxes of the Stoics, where he gives a better explanation. And he says, I'm paraphrasing here, that although all of our errors are equally errors, and all of our virtuous actions are equally virtuous, they are all expressions of an errant mind or of a coherent mind, still, the circumstances of all virtuous actions are not the same. And the circumstances of all errant actions are not the same. And this is actually a totally orthodox point. So let's just remind ourselves of the most fundamental fact about Stoic ethics. And that is, they divide up values into two classes, and correspondingly then the pro-attitudes and con-attitudes of agents into two classes. On the one hand, and this division is, there's nothing weird about it. You already accept this division. There are some values in the world, there are things you value, that you think, the success of my life depends upon those things. If I have them, my life is they help me go better. If I don't have them, my life goes worse. There are other things you value that aren't like that. That failing to get them doesn't threaten the success of your life. Getting them doesn't make your life go better. And you draw this distinction. You draw a distinction between the importance of your friends and family and the importance of the store having your favorite ice cream. So the Stoics make very heavy weather of this, of course. And what they'll say is, what matters for success is just having a coherent mind and acting accordingly. Everything else doesn't matter. But of course, if you have a coherent mind, among the different attitudes that are incoherent are preferences for all sorts of things. So you might prefer to be rich and powerful and able to help a lot of people. Right? If the world does not give you the riches and powers, you get unlucky or whatever, it doesn't crush you. You accept it. It doesn't make a difference to whether your life is going well, to your coherence. But you would prefer to be in those circumstances. You might prefer to be a successful politician to being a sculptor. But you can live perfectly successful lives in either place. And so this is where they can say, look, the sculptor's virtuous activity is just as virtuous. It expresses a coherent mind as the politician's virtuous activity. But still, one might prefer the politician's activities to the sculptor's because it helps more people. So that kind of thought allows you to distinguish between virtue, which doesn't come in degrees, and virtuous action, which in a way does. So similarly, internal friendship, the friendship of the soul, doesn't come in degrees, but external friendship, the friendship actually shared with another human being, does. And it varies in degrees corresponding to interactions with that other person. That's my suggestion for you anyhow. The distinction I've been drawing allows us, I think, to make sense of Chrysippus' talk of degrees of friendship in text 13, to make sense of the claim in the text 11 that sages who are not acquaintances are not totally friends. They're friends, but not totally friends, without giving up on the belief that sages are friends even if they're not acquaintances. They are friends, but they're not totally friends. They're not friends in the highest degree. And notice that these concessions to the value of sharing recognized benefits also begin to explain how the Stoics would accommodate the value of sharing particular projects. One of the other three considerations that I thought might underpin the thought that friends have to be acquaintances. It remains to note that the Stoics do in fact consider all sorts of shared activities to be preferable if the circumstances permit. They seek out shared activities with friends. They say it's appropriate to spend time with friends. They say it's appropriate to seek friends, to hunt for them, they say. It's appropriate to educate a youth so that he or she may become virtuous, because then when he or she is virtuous, he or she is a suitable friend. All of that evidence is clear. Nor are these activities geographically restricted. in his work on lives, Chrysippus argues that one should take up a life that helps other human beings if one can, and a life in politics especially because it's the one that most enables helping other human beings on a big scale. But alternately to the life of politics, he thinks that the life devoted to teaching can help a lot of people too, and he explicitly urges that one might best be able to help other people by leaving your native city and going abroad. The search for friends and the cultivation of friendly face-to-face relations retains the cosmopolitan scope that one would expect of fans of cosmopolitan friendship. That's real practical import. Finally then, what about goodwill? That last of the three intuitive considerations in favor of restricting friends to acquaintances. Doesn't goodwill require more than generalized concern for someone who might be out there? And isn't this requirement fundamental to the others? Isn't it just that it's not just that friends must benefit each other, they must benefit each other because they wish good things for each other. And it's not just that friends must share a particular project, but they must share a particular project because they wish good things for each other. Two friends must really know each other to wish each other well, don't they? The Stoics, I want to say, are not deaf to these concerns, but they distinguish. There's what really matters, what's essential to living well and to friendship, and that's the state of your soul. And then there's what anyone should prefer to do if the circumstances permit, and that involves cultivating friendship and goodwill with actual particular other people. If a sage is fortunate, she cultivates friendship with others in face-to-face relations, complete with shared projects. But if a sage is not fortunate, she will experience at most the friendship with the gods and the interior friendship with herself and the generalized friendship with other humans who might or might not exist. To refuse that, the name friendship, on the grounds of that second platitude, the Stoics could say, would be to misconstrue what's most important about friendship, which is not the external activities, but the state of mind. To think, though, that the state of mind is all there is to friendship would also be a mistake. And it's a mistake the Stoics are happy to concede. They're happy to say the interior state of mind is not all there is to friendship. We seek the exterior activities and seek to cultivate them. So that's my attempt to say how the Stoics could say that two human beings who haven't met can still be plausibly called friends, how the theory of friendship that underwrites that claim is not deaf to the considerations of common sense about what friendship really is, and how in fact it might even be more plausible there might be good reasons for psychologizing the core of friendship and thinking what really matters about friendship is that psychological core and not the external activities. That gets us into questions of axiology about where the most important values are, whether they're in external behaviors or whether they're psychological. But now to prompt further reflection on the kind of view that I've tried to articulate for the Stoics, I want to just throw at you a text you probably know. It's just a text from the first chapter of Book 8 of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. This is the 8 and 9 of Nicomachean Ethics are the friendship books in that work. And he starts off trying to justify why friendship should be a topic for consideration in lectures on ethics. And one of the considerations, as often when he's trying to justify a topic, is, well, nature requires us to discuss this. And so he wants to talk about how friendship exists naturally. And he wants to say, in fact, that there are three kinds of natural friendship. But there's actually disagreement about the text. Some people think he's saying there's only two. If you think that, we can argue in the Q&A. But here's the text as I understand it. Friendship seems to be present by nature. This is text 16 on your handout. Friendship seems to be present by nature, A, in parent toward offspring and offspring toward parent, not only among human beings, but also among birds and most kinds of animals. And friendship seems to be present by nature in those of the same stock toward one another. And, most of all, understood, friendship seems to be present by nature in human beings, which is why we praise lovers of human beings. And one might observe, just in one's travels, that every human being is akin to every other and a friend. And one of the things that makes that really striking, that last kind of friendship, really striking for Aristotle is when he unveils the indoxa, the received views about friendship, which he's going to do over the next chapter and a half, he hammers on the thought that friends have to be acquaintances and share activities. Exactly the commonplace I was starting from, right? And that commonplace is obviously at odds with the claim that every human is a friend to every other human, full stop. So it looks like he can't really mean what he says here. He can only mean at most that we have a friendly disposition toward each other. He can't really mean that we're friends to each other. But he feels some temptation to say the stronger claim, even though it doesn't fit with his theory. So that to me suggests that Aristotle, as I think often is the case, because he's so alive to a wide range of values, is a little bit of two minds. The Stoics, as befits their more obsessively rigorous character, try to get themselves down to being just of one mind about the issue. And in doing that, they're willing to flout a commonplace. But what's distinctive about the way they flout the commonplace is how sensitive they are to the considerations that give rise to the commonplace. So, cosmopolitan friendship, maybe not completely implausible. Thank you.